Hello, welcome to CrossCurrents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Barbara Rutstein, the moderator for today's program. Our program today is part of the League's voter service education presentation to inform voters on the issues that will be decided on the ballot on November 5th. Our topic is Amendment 66. Does public education need tax reform? For some years, the state and local communities have been grappling with how to deal with problems in public education, teaching as well as funding. In 2010, an effort to deal with the teaching part of the problem, the legislature passed Senate Bill 191, the Education Effectiveness Bill. This bill sets up a system to evaluate teachers and to propose remediation as needed. It also sets up learning benchmarks for students in each grade. Last year, a judge ruled that the legislature, not the court, is responsible for funding reform in education. This year, the legislature passed Senate Bill 213, which changes the way pre-kindergarten through 12th grade will be funded if voters pass Amendment 66. Here to tell us about Amendment 66 and the arguments for and against it, we have on my right, Rollie Heath, State Senator and co-author of Senate Bill 213. On his right is Patrick Albright, member of the Board of Education of the Poudre School District. On his right is Chad McWhinney, businessman and state chair of Teach America. And on his right is Penn Pfiffner, chairman of the Issues Committee, Coloradoans Against Unions Using Kids as Pawns. Welcome to you and to our studio and viewing audiences. For the first part of our discussion, we will focus on the increased educational opportunities for students. And after that portion, I will turn to the audience and see if you have any questions on the education portion. Then the second part will focus on financing and its implication for taxpayers. And tonight our show can go till 8:30, so we have enough time, I think, to get into some of the nitty-gritty of this amendment. So Rollie, why don't you begin, since you're an author of this bill, co-author, and tell us how some of the money will be used.
Thanks, Barb, and thanks all of you for attending, and for those of you that are watching, just a quick little background about myself and why I happen to be so passionate about this subject. My wife and I came to Colorado in 1970 in a business position, and I have basically spent over 40 years in business in Colorado. I've been privileged enough to run a billion-dollar company and started two of my own. Manufacturing company and a consulting business, in addition to the Johns Manville experience, which was the billion-dollar company. And what I learned during all of that experience is that you cannot separate economic development, business, and jobs from education. They are one and the same. And when we moved to this state in 1970, Colorado was up close to the top of the heap in funding education virtually at all levels. In fact, up until the early 80s, we were above the national average in funding preschool through 12th grade. And today, the numbers show that we are close to $2,000 per child less than the national average. So how did this all happen? Why did it happen? We could get into all of that, but I don't think we want to do it here. But the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, we are not serving the students of the state by giving them the opportunities that certainly our kids got when they were in schools in the 70s and 80s. And we know that money isn't everything. But what this bill does is basically changes how we finance schools. We have not done the School Finance Act since roughly 1992. So this looks at a more equitable way to fund schools. It puts money where I think it needs to be put, and that is in preschool and full-day kindergarten. And we have a lot of English language learners in the school, which we certainly did not have in those early years. All of those areas are critical, I believe, to giving the students out there a chance to succeed and excel. You know, it's awful to have as your goal to be average. But really what this bill does is really doesn't even get us up to the average of funding. But that's all what this bill does. It's an incredible opportunity, I believe, for the citizens of this state to step forward and give our kids and really commit to kids.
Okay, any other comments about what does the bill do in education? Who's ready to jump in?
I'll be glad to add my voice to that. And first, Barb, let me thank you for this great opportunity that you've given us to have a voice in what's going to go on this fall, and to give your viewers and listeners a chance to really dig in. With an hour and a half of stuff, we ought to be able to talk about a lot of issues in depth. They better grab a big bunch of popcorn and sit back and enjoy this. So thank you for making this opportunity available to us. It's important to understand that we'll be talking tonight not just about the initiative that people will be voting on, but that it goes hand in glove with legislation that has already passed during this last legislative session. And you may hear us use shorthand such as Senate Bill 213. That was what actually got passed and signed by the governor this year, that then says it, with its reforms, will only go into effect if the initiative passes. Now, I'm going to be here to explain that a lot of what you've heard from Senator Heath is not the sort of information you really need in terms of accuracy. Have I put that nicely? That, in fact, you're going to find that this measure is unwise, it's unfair, it's certainly not necessary, it's immensely complex. And I hope that as we talk, we recognize that what's being asked here in the biggest tax increase ever proposed is the idea that you can get improvements simply by putting more money in. That they are one and one. That as soon as you put more money in, you get more improvements. And yet, we won't get improvements in the dropout rates. This bill, Senate Bill 213, and the initiative says nothing about improving test scores. It's nothing about learning better. It is a redistribution of money for how we do schooling, and we'll have to talk about the School Finance Act as we get into this. I certainly want to give my colleagues the opportunity to weigh in as well.
Okay, well, one of the things is preschool, I guess, pretty generally throughout the state for at-risk children. Do we have preschool education for all at-risk children in Poudre R1 now, Patrick?
I wouldn't necessarily all at-risk children. We do have a new preschool plan that has been, or early childhood education plan that's been in place now for about 4 years. We're not seeing quite the demand for it that we expected. Now, some of it is tuition-based, some of it receives further subsidies than that. But one of the things that we're seeing, coming out of this state legislation, is a lot of these decisions around full-day kindergarten. There are Poudre schools who offer full-day kindergarten. The school that my daughter goes to offers full-day kindergarten, which works very well for some kids. Other kids, it doesn't work. Half-day kindergarten was much better for my daughter. That worked really well for us, works really well for a lot of the parents. Those kinds of decisions are being taken away from the parents to make, they're being taken away from the local districts to make, and being placed into a more centralized construct, a more centralized mandate from the state to happen. So This is a common trend that we have seen with teacher evaluations, with a number of other initiatives, the decision-making being taken from the local level, being brought to the state level. And so these are all hand in hand with the early childhood, with the full-day kindergarten. We keep seeing that happen, which makes us less responsive as a board to our constituents and less able to do things that we need to be able to do.
Okay, Rollie, does the bill mandate preschool for all 3 and 4 years old?
No, the bill, unfortunately, does not go nearly as far as I would like it to go. It's preschool for at-risk 4-year-olds only.
Okay.
And what we know is that early childhood education is probably the best investment we can make. If a child is not able to read by the time they finish 3rd grade, we know that they are at risk in terms of for the rest of their lives. And we also know that if you have a good preschool experience, it is going to weigh very heavily on that child's ability to read by the 3rd grade. So frankly, we ought to be investing more of our money in early childhood education rather than just at-risk 4-year-olds, but that's what the bill does.
Okay, and I noticed that, Chad, you're involved with Teach America. Is that on the lower levels or only on advanced levels? I don't really know.
So Teach for America is a national organization. I'm the chair for Colorado. And I'd like to talk just for a second about how I got involved, because our organization is supported by many Republicans, Democrats, Independents. We try to really be a nonpartisan organization, focus obviously a lot on the human capital, if you will, of the K-12 public education system. But in 2005 or 2006, I got invited by Senator Wayne Allard to go back to Washington, D.C. to a Capitol conference. And we got to meet Alan Greenspan. And the senator said, Chad, would you like to ask the chairman a question? And I said, sure. I said, Mr. Chairman, what keeps you awake at night? I said, in other words, what's the single biggest concern or fear that you have? And at the time, he was chairman of the Federal Reserve, regarded as one of the most powerful people in the world. I'd like to know what scares him. And he said, most Americans are financially illiterate, but if I had to pick the single greatest threat to the American way of life as we know it today, it is our broken K-12 public education system. He said, we used to be one of the best in the world. Now, at that time, we were number 16 or 17. I think now we're number 23 or 24. He said, we're going downhill, and we're going downhill fast. And unless we fix K-12 public education system, the American way of life as we know it will cease to exist. I didn't really know what to do about that until I got introduced to Teach for America and in Ed Reform. And there's people like Jeb Bush and Michael Bloomberg and Senator Johnston, and I enjoy working with people from all different parts of the political system on a common goal, and that is to fix the education system in America. If you look at Finland, they have the #1 education system in the world. They have one school of ed. Singapore is right up there towards the top. They have 3 schools of ed. In America, we have 1,100 schools of ed. We can put people on the moon, we can fight world wars, we can cure polio, etc. Fixing K-12 public education is not as hard as it might seem. And in fact, I think in terms of a lot of the reforms, I think a lot of us in here will agree. We may disagree on how to fund the reforms, but I'm looking forward to having this debate.
Well, and I think it's important to recognize the extent to which this bill and then the amendment we're being asked to vote on don't get to the heart of the issue. 2 of my kids matriculated right here at CSU. Certainly they were asked to go through a process to ensure that they were ready for college. And we are seeing an increasing number of kids who come out of Colorado high schools not ready for college. It would seem to me that we should be more worried about getting with the system that we have now done right, rather than say the only way we can fix it is to expand it into younger and younger ages. And in fact, the information that Senator Heath gave you, that the most important thing you can do, he said, was to increase preschool education, is old information. That was something that was tried earlier. A more recent report from the federal government itself questions whether Head Start and other preschool programs are worth the money, because the problem is that, yes, they help kids as they come out of the programs, but by 3rd grade, the difference dissipates. It goes away. So kids without this sort of education are able to do as well by the 3rd grade as those that have it. And we're being asked to plug a lot of money into the preschool stuff that probably won't help the way we've been told it will. And there are better ways to do reform.
Okay, what about extra funding for gifted and talented? Do you have a lack of that in Poudre R1?
I wouldn't say we have a lack of that. We have a very diverse population. You know, we have students of poor socioeconomic backgrounds to very wealthy economic backgrounds, and very broad base of talent. Gifted and talented is one of the adjustment factors we use in our funding. So that is a factor that gets compensated for, along with English language learners, at-risk populations. These all get accounted for in our funding system right now.
And would you be looking forward to more money for that, or you have sufficient funds?
At this time, you know, you can always come out and say there's things that we'd like more funding for. Focusing on gifting, you know, one of the things that always disturbs me, we see a lot of focus placed on the bottom performing students. We see a lot of focus placed on the top performing students. So the at-risk English language learners tend to have the poor socioeconomic background at the bottom, the gifted and talented at the top. And then there's this great middle that tends to be forgotten. So we see these things gravitating towards the ends, and the average students start to lose out. So I like our district to be able to look at that, look at our population, and be able to control how that gets allocated.
Barb,
Okay.
I was surprised you brought that up in the way you did, because it makes it sound as if gifted and talented is a big, significant portion of this reform. And yet you're asking for $1,000 million, $1 billion every year in new taxes. This is $7 million. $7 million. So what, less than 0.1%. You've got a tiny portion that's being dedicated for gifted and talented.
Okay. I mean, it's just that it goes around the state. I'm asking Poudre R1 because that's obvious what Patrick knows. He doesn't know about Monte Vista or Alamosa or any place else, and I don't know what goes on there. Chad, you had a comment?
Yeah, I before we get into the funding, both Ben and Patrick, I'd love to understand, because I've worked very closely in, again, putting the funding aside in ed reform in Colorado. What in this legislation don't you think, other than the funding, will help us increase our education rates in Colorado?
Is that a question
Sure.
you'd like us to answer?
No, that's fine.
Okay,
You
that's
can,
fine.
You can converse with each other. That
Oh.
makes my job easier.
Mr. McWhinney, the problem that you've got here as you approach this reform is confusing or conflating two different issues. Are you going to have education reform that improves the outcomes, and therefore, you know, maybe you want to turn to a Board of Education person and say, how can you do things better? With just, if we dump money in at the top, will we get the reform we want? And I've already suggested the type of spending you're doing, or suggesting here to us for a huge increase, the largest increase ever, is just not going to get the money done. And you're saying, I'm sorry, not get the reform done. And you're asking, well, how much money do you want to give? But that asks me to presume your bias, which is, gee, if we only had more money, we'd have better outcomes. One of the things that Senator Heath brought up was this national comparison, and it's important to understand that Colorado compares very favorably to the states in the mountain and plains area. So we are
In funding or outcomes?
in funding and
Okay.
in outcomes
Okay.
as well. So if you look at Oklahoma and Utah and Arizona, Colorado funds a lot more per student than those places. We're about even with Kansas, a little behind, and a little more behind Nebraska. But when you look around our region, we compare very favorably in outcomes and money.
Penn, if I
That's-
can, let me just stop you on that, because Montana, we're $4,975 per student less. Wyoming, $9,508. New Mexico, $1,664. Nebraska, $4,243. Kansas, $2,479. And the point being that we have, for whatever reason, not made the investments we should make in education. We have fallen behind our peers. Now, and I know you and I have done this before 2 years ago, and it's only gotten worse. We're almost $2,000 below the national average. I agree with you, the first thing that you said, money is not everything. You can't dump money in. But we have passed some of the toughest reforms in this state. Senator Bob Bacon, who the retired senator from here, and I were the co-sponsors of Senate Bill 191 with Senator Johnston in the Senate. I'm on the National Policy Committee of the National Conference of State Legislators. We have the toughest reforms in this country. We did not put a nickel into those reforms. We asked teachers and schools to absorb all of that. This bill will fund those reforms and allow us to do the things that I think you and I both want us to do, and that's to have a more effective school system. But yes, I agree with you, money isn't everything, but when we're this far behind, and we have chosen to not fund education at the levels I think we should, then we need to do something. And this is an attempt to do that.
Well, the nice thing is, and let me get this one thing briefly said, Patrick, and then over to you. The nice thing is that it's the voters that will make the decision, and I think they recognize that we're very competitive with other states around here. You can't use national averages because then you're putting in money from places like Newark, New Jersey with 20,000 and Washington, D.C. with 20,000 per kid, where the outcome is so much worse. So it's, again, conflating dollars with outcomes. And at the beginning of this program, we heard the senator say that it's most important to economic development. Well, if that's the case, why aren't businesses rushing to places like Newark that have 20,000 per kid, or Detroit that has 13,000 per kid? If that's really the #1 criteria for economic development, then we're not seeing it played out across the nation.
Okay, Patrick, you had a comment?
Great. I'm glad you mentioned Senate Bill 191, Senator. That's one that on the Poudre Board of Education we're dealing with quite a bit. 191 is the new Teacher Educator Effectiveness Act, the teacher evaluation system, of which $366 million, over a third of this tax increase, is going to go to go to fund staff to implement that, along with standardized testing. That's money that's going towards evaluations, not even getting anywhere close to the classroom. But this is what I'm talking about as things gravitate from the local districts to the state, which 191 has done with the evaluation system. It started out as a very good idea, as a way to ease the path to help remove the minuscule number of teachers who were not performing to the standards they need to help our students grow, which frankly makes the job much more difficult for the vast majority of our very outstanding and amazing teachers that we have in our school districts. So that's a good idea, but in actuality what that's become is a bureaucratic nightmare for the local school districts. We're going to have to figure out the amount of time and effort that teachers and principals have to put into this evaluation system is extreme. I've seen the instrument of evaluation. I see Greg Grody out here in the audience from the Poudre Education Association. He's heard me talk about this before. When our Director of Human Resources showed us the instrument of evaluation that satisfied the state requirements, I was horrified to see what that was. It was a 30-page document with 40 questions that teachers are going to have to fill out, multiple peer appraisals, self-appraisals, probably in 5-part harmony and full orchestration. I figure next year they'll probably have to attach 27 8x10 color glossy pictures with circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back of each one explaining what each one was to be used as evidence. This is what our teachers are facing to put their effort in instead of spending time in the classroom doing the job that they're hired to do, doing the job that they do so well for our students. We shouldn't be spending $366 million to fund this program. We should be repealing it. That's one of my big issues. That kind of money going to this evaluation system that doesn't get to the classroom, it doesn't further learning. I want to see that kind of thing gone and the control returned to the local districts so that we can make the decisions ourselves on how best to evaluate our teachers, how best to serve our students.
Okay, Chad.
So I'd love to take just a couple minutes and walk through some of the specifics of this bill and what's going on in ed reform. In Denver, we have several schools that, one of them, Cole Elementary, I don't know if you guys have ever been to it, but it was so bad, it actually, the district closed it down several years ago. Teach for America got involved and basically adopted the school, kind of took it over, if you will, and it's one of the highest performing schools now in Denver. And we believe, and I'm not speaking just on behalf of Teach for America, but I believe schools should be run like a business. You know, if you talk to, there's a local businessman up here by the name of Doug Schatz, and I was talking to him about ed reform a couple years ago. And he said years ago, General Electric, who's known for having one of the best management philosophies and companies in the world, hired McKinsey & Company to come in, and they said, we have all these great star performers in our company. We want you to create a test and a survey to figure out how we can, what makes them so great, so we can test for them, so we can hire more of them. They spent a couple $1 million, came back and said, well, we have a problem. And he said, what's that? And he said, well, we can only test for about 5% of what makes someone a great leader in your organization. They said, we can test for knowledge, we can test for skills, and we can test for ability. And they said, what's the other 95%? And they said, attitude. And Senate Bill 191 and what a lot of these reforms do is they really start to get the schools to operate like a business does. And for example, Senator Johnston, the author of the bill, is a former Teach for America teacher, used to be a principal. And he said, Chad, I was given a budget, $4.7 million to run a school. I was the principal. And of the $4.7 million budget, $63,000 was in my control. He goes, basically, I could pick the difference between red and blue pencils. But I was expected to be held to the outcomes. And we have a broken system. Funding, I agree with everyone. If you just dump more funding into the current system, it will not work, and that is a bad investment. Why the business community, or at least the people I'm working with, support this is because they know that it comes with very substantial reforms, and I'd like to take just a second and walk through them. Right now, the current system, basically 1 day a year, they count the, I call it butts and seats, and every school, however many students they have in the classroom that day, determines their funding for the year. This reform bill basically is going to be measured daily. And so you've got an incentive out there where on the first day of school, people are offering free iPads and doing everything they can to get those kids in the classroom. And then whether or not they stay and go to another school, et cetera, really doesn't matter because they get that funding for the whole year. This bill is going to make it where the funding happens based on the student every day in that classroom. The second thing is it's going to treat principals like CEOs. They're going to be much more accountable and responsible for their budgets and be able to hire and fire more freely. For example, one of the best performing schools in Denver is West Denver Prep. And I took a very successful business person there to go see what was going on. I walked up to this building and I'm like, what kind of building? This isn't a school. And I go, it's a car dealership. We were sitting in the lobby and I go, this is an old car dealership. And he's like, no, I think this is a mortuary. And we went back and forth and I asked the principal when they came out and I said, what did this building used to be? And he's like, oh, this is an old mortuary. And I'm like, oh, you were right. My point was they didn't spend all this money on bricks and mortars and things like that. They put it into things that are effective with the students and not just necessarily bricks and mortar.
Mr. McWhinney, this is so important. I would hope we don't move away from this issue right now, and that is local control. Now, I've read Senate Bill 213 and I've read the initiative, and I don't remember seeing anywhere where principals get the type of control, but I do know that we are changing control in very important ways. And quite frankly, my colleague, Mr. Albright, probably has more information about local control and how this changes it.
I think 191 has to do with that.
Let me respond. By the way, Poudre Valley school system is doing their own evaluation of effectiveness system. You're not dictated. You had an option as to what you did as a school board and how you put the teacher effectiveness into play. Poudre Valley and a number of other school districts are doing their own. So let me just make sure that's clear. You had a choice. You could have done whatever you wanted to do in terms of the effectiveness, so long as you did the evaluation. So you had an option there. And this whole notion of local control is very, very important in this state, and it's a total balancing act. The other part of this is, what's happened here is that the state used to fund about a third, and now we're funding basically 2/3 of the local school bill. And part of what we're trying to do here is to make a balance and to get schools more equitably funded and basically have all the options that you have. there's clearly no intent here to deal with, to undo local control. And certainly, as you depicted 191, it does not do exactly what you said, just so you know. And other school districts have made other choices as to how to employ 191 and how to employ the evaluation systems.
Okay, any other comments on this?
I'll just make one more
Sure,
thing.
go right ahead.
And that is the current system right now, and I think it's a little misleading to voters, that whenever a local area decides to increase taxes, charters don't get that funding. Part of the reform of this bill is charters will actually be at the same level for increased funding. And clearly, some of the highest performing schools we have in the state of Colorado right now are charters.
It's not actually true. Liberty Common and Ridgeview are getting a fair share of the 2010 mill levy that the Poudre School District passed.
Are they getting the exact same thing as the other schools or not?
I believe they get 98% of what the other schools get, with 2% administrative.
Okay, and we don't know if that's statewide. We only know for Poudre R1.
I was talking statewide.
Yes.
And
Okay.
please understand that when you brought up Senate Bill 191, Barb, that really wasn't the local control that concerns so many people about this legislation and this amendment. Colorado is one of 4 states in the nation in which we spend more, we tax more, and we spend more locally than we do at the state level for all government services. Colorado likes having its local control. And we do the same thing with schools. The way the current School Finance Act works is you presume a certain amount from each district and the state backfills. This dramatically changes that local control and says that with an appointed board for some portion of it, not elected, and the legislature, they're going to be making the decisions that used to be made by the local school districts in terms of how much can be funded, how much you can go over the overrides. In some cases, they're going to pretty much mandate that the local districts increase their money to match. So there are a bunch of questions that I don't think have been worked out, even in the minds of the proponents, but it dramatically does move things from the local control that we so enjoy in our neighborhoods and our counties and our school districts, and moves it to a decision-making being done under the Gold Dome. And that's a good reason not to do it.
And Pam, that is totally untrue. There is not one thing that you said there that you could back up for that. Basically, what we're trying to do is we've got some school districts that are paying less than 2 mills, where basically the state is funding the whole thing. We got the poorer school districts at the maximum of the 25 mills. And yes, we're trying to mediate that, but there's nothing in there that mandates districts put in mill levies or do anything. There is absolutely nothing in this bill that does that.
There is quite a lot, especially if you look at starting about page 38, as I recall. I just went over this with one of the people who drafted the bill and asked, how is this all working, that you're having these formulas come in that limit things? So you won't find it in the initiative. You find it in the legislation that was passed this year, all about how districts must react in terms of asking for overrides or not going beyond, and how they will be held harmless in some cases where they don't meet the amount of money. But then every 5 years, every 10 years, there's a reassessment, and the reassessment is going to be not on what is, but what should have been. And that's going to dictate very much what comes out of local government's spending.
The 25 mil levy max is what's current law. That doesn't change.
Okay, any other comments about that? What about from the audience? Any questions about the education portion? You may give your name and ask a question to one person or the whole group, and I will let them all answer.
Good evening. My name is Eric Sutherland. I'm a citizen of Fort Collins. My question goes specifically to Mr. McWhinney. How in the world can you stand as a proponent of this tax increase when your organization is in receipt of tens of millions of dollars of property tax money diverted from the Thompson School District
Excuse
to
me.
subsidize the Centera development. And it is extremely important in terms of Initiative 22 because it does require bond mill levy overrides. Every mill levy override that the Thompson School District has passed, you're getting a share of. Dollars that should be going to the school district, going to Loveland URA and Centera instead.
I'm sorry, that really has nothing to do with the bill. Any other questions on the education portion?
As you pointed out, in 2008, Colorado, I'll just make a short comment and then I have two questions. 2008, Colorado passed legislation to revise the academic standards. That was 212. And then in 2010, as you've discussed, we passed 191, the Colorado Effectiveness Bill. The other thing that you haven't mentioned is the Colorado Board of Education voted to adopt Common Core standards for English language arts and math. And there's been quite a bit of discussion about local control. This moves it totally in the other way to national unelected people involved in our standards. Colorado has bought into this whole idea of standards and assessments. These are really key words to improve student outcome and teacher effectiveness. Millions of dollars are spent.
Can you ask the question, please?
Yeah, well, just take a minute. Millions of dollars are spent on testing, and however, our test scores in the last 10 years have not improved. So we're throwing all this money against standards and assessments. Many states are now backing out of this Common Core and also the associated testing, this PARCC. So there's a lot of voices, as you've pointed out, that have major reform. I'll get to this in just a minute. Of American school system. 212 has only 10% of this whole tax increase allocated to, quote, innovation, and that's set up with some sort of grant fund.
Is your question about the core?
My questions
get
are,
to them, please.
why don't we see Colorado setting goals for real reform to improve learning? And then at a minimum, get us, if local control is really important, get us out of Common Core and PARCC.
Okay, who would like to tackle that?
So ma'am, help me. You want to get us out of the Common Core, but you want local control and you want the state to do something about it? I'm not sure I followed your question. I'm not sure how all of that works. But high stakes testing, is that your?
Okay, I think it has to do with testing. If she doesn't have the microphone, the people at home can't hear. So it has to do with testing. Why don't you address that? If you can or want to.
Well, No Child Left Behind obviously set all kinds of standards, and I think we're all at the point where No Child Left Behind is certainly did not accomplish what it had to do, and that it was all the high stakes testing was part of it. I just came back from Atlanta for the National Conference of State Legislatures, and we had an incredible amount of conversation around the Common Core. Colorado is implementing it for the two things that you mentioned. There are 15 other subjects. I think we have a long way to go in conversation because I think there are some concerns. Park is what you referred to, where we're part of that coalition. I think there are 36 states that belong to that coalition. So I think there's a lot of conversation that's being had both at the Colorado Department of Education level and certainly at the legislative level. I think it will be a subject for debate, for discussion during this legislative session.
Okay, any other comments on that?
Well, I'll get into the issue with the Common Core is there are parts of it, parts of the standards that are good, but again, the control and the way they're taught. Poudre School District has developed its own curriculum. It's a very good curriculum. Also, we're a very high choice district. We have a number of core knowledge programs, something I'm very much a proponent of. That's where my daughter's going to Liberty Common. They have a core knowledge program. International Baccalaureate is another program that's very popular. So as the state begins to start making these curriculum decisions, those decisions are being taken away from the parents, from the local districts being disenfranchised, and centralized in Denver, centralized in Washington with these national standards. I would rather see the control of that remain in the local districts.
Okay. Any other questions on the education portion? Yes, please identify yourself and your question.
Yeah, I'm Greg Grody. I am a longtime teacher in the Poudre School District and currently serve as the president of the Teacher Association, representing all the great licensed staff here in Fort Collins. Hearing all the talk about the school systems being whether broken or in need of improvement, which I think every organization in our country could improve what they do. So I don't know that I'd call it broken. But what, from each panelist, would you suggest is missing, in your opinion, from our schools that more money could help?
Okay. Who wants to start?
Again, if I start out with the same bias that the questioner did, I'd have to say, well, gee, we're terribly underfunded, and I just don't believe that. I see us comparing very favorably when I look around states nearby, and I also see that the outcomes are favorable compared to some of the national places or places around the nation that spend a lot more money. The question before us is not what we should spend the money on, but whether Senate Bill 213 has set us up to have an intelligent tax increase. And I find the tax increase very unwise. I find the underlying legislation very poorly thought out. It's just a bad deal and we need to turn it down. That's why I'm here advocating that everybody vote no when they get their mail-in ballot in October.
Okay, Chad, why don't you tell us what you would spend the money on?
You know, human capital in any business is the most important resource. I personally think teachers should be paid more, but I think they should be held to very strict accountability. And quite frankly, the better they do, the better results they achieve, the more they should get paid. That's how it works in the business world, and it seems to work pretty well.
Okay, Patrick.
Again, I understand what Penn is saying with a lot of the bias. You have to kind of look at it through that lens. There were some things that I would have liked to have seen in the bill that would have been involved a better distribution of the money. I know Representative Kevin Priola, for instance, offered an amendment that would have achieved charter school parity. I would have liked to have seen that. It was defeated. That was killed. So that was a disappointment, making certain that all of our schools are playing on that same level. There's some other innovative ideas that sound like they take money up front, but they end up saving the district in the long run. When you see the burgeoning homeschool community, that's really taking advantage of the networking they have available to them now, the ability to the technology that's available through the internet and everything that they have, and the more mainstream those groups have become. Senator Kevin Lundberg has every year offered an educational tax credit where parents can keep their own money, not receive state money, but keep their own money. A little bit of that if they want to use that towards homeschooling or some other form of schooling, which ends up saving districts in the long run because then you don't spend the $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 per pupil that you need to educate that pupil in return for that.
Okay, Rollie.
Well, clearly what we know is the most critical factor in a student's ability to learn is the teacher standing in front of that classroom without any hesitation. Chad earlier mentioned Finland. It happens to be, of all the professions that there are, the teachers in Finland are the highest paid profession. And they're held to extremely high standards, and they are honored in that society as for what they do. I happen to have married a teacher who's sitting back there. And we, I think, desperately need to give greater support to the most important part of this whole system. We can talk about all the reforms, we can talk about everything else. But if that teacher standing in front of that class is not an effective teacher, we know what that can do to set back kids. So
Okay.
part of this investment, Chad said human capital. I had 10,000 people working for me at one point in time in my life. I know how important it is to recognize, honor, and reward those people that are doing the very best. The Teacher Effectiveness 191 was our way of dealing with that, is making sure that we gave all the support, and when a teacher was not performing, not throw them out, but give them all of the help and training and support and mentors that we can possibly do. That's all part of 191. And it is our attempt to give teachers that support. A lot of this bill, a lot of the money in this bill goes to support teachers and their training and give them the very best opportunity to succeed. That's where I think we need to spend the money and make sure that that opportunity is given to every person who's willing to get into this tough profession a chance to be as successful as they can, and then to reward them for their service.
Okay, Chad?
So I want to talk about my first visit to a school regarding ed reform in Colorado. And it was right after I met with Alan Greenspan, et cetera. So I started meeting people, and I said, I want to help. I want to do something about ed reform. And I said, what's one of the transformational schools in Colorado? And I got invited to go to Lincoln High on Federal Boulevard in Denver. Actually grabbed Larry Kendall here from Northern Colorado and invited him to go with me. Said, you want to go see a transformational school? Let's go check it out. Get in the car, get off I-25, get on Federal. As we're approaching the school, I couldn't help but notice all the bars and the windows and all the bars and the windows and all the businesses. Pulled up to Lincoln High, and I even think there was a squad car parked out in front. I even think I had to go through a metal detector to get into the school. And I walk into this classroom, and there's this teacher there by the name of Katie. She happened to be on her third year. She only signed up for 2 years, but she's decided to stay 3 years. She was a graduate of Michigan State, and she had a degree in chemical engineering. And she was in that classroom making $30-some thousand bucks a year. And she had been offered over $100,000 a year to go work for Dow Chemical. And she said, you know what, I want to go help out ed reform and do my part for a couple years, and I'm having so much fun, I'm going to spend an extra year. When she started in that classroom, and the way it worked is the principal really had originally opposed, and I met with the principal of the school at the time recently, he originally opposed putting these high-performing teachers that had a proven track record of being able to do this into his school. He was convinced to allow one. Katie was that person. Katie came in there, and by the time she finished her first class, 70% of the students in her classroom didn't graduate, were proficient in what she was teaching, whereas the teacher before, and not that the teacher before was a bad teacher, but it was something like 10 or 15% were proficient. The principal said, wow, this one individual was able to increase the outcomes that much. He actually called Teach for America and said, I will take as many as you can give me. I'm not trying to change the whole school, but what's happening is Katie is starting to have an effect on other teachers, and she's starting to teach those other teachers what she's learned, et cetera. Part of the funding in this bill goes to reward those types of teachers and allow them to basically become trainers, if you will, and help take best practices, et cetera, and apply them all throughout the school.
Okay, let's move on to the financing part, because this is a tax bill. It is my understanding that school funding was cut by about $1 billion between 2008 and 2012. Is this an effort to restore that decrease? Rollie?
Well, let's go back and try to understand what happened. We passed something called Amendment 23, which basically was basically said we would increase funding for education by growth, inflation plus 1%, and the 1% was to last, I think, for 10 years, and that's now gone. It was presumed that that bill talked about funding in total. And a decision was made after the legislature, council was asked, and basically said that that funding only applied to the base funding. It did not apply to all the other factors that went into it over and above: English language learners, at-risk children, and so forth. So as a result of that, we fell behind in something called the negative factor, that if it had been interpreted to go to not only the base, but to all of the total funding, there would be about $1.1 billion less. So as a result, the legislature was able to balance the budget by cutting what we would normally have put into K through 12. Hence, we have this. So yes, but what we didn't talk about on the other part of this, there's really two funds that we've got to understand, and we didn't get into that. Penn talked about it a little bit when he introduced this conversation. We need to understand the whole bill and what happens with it in terms of the funding. So what 213. What 213 did was said basically the funding that goes into the state education fund, which is that amount of money that comes from the general fund, which is income tax, excise tax, those kinds of things. The general fund, 43% would be set aside for K through 12, or pre through 12 actually. Then this amount of money that we're talking about, which is what the tax increase is, that funding, which basically says up to $75,000 of your federal adjusted gross income, will go from 4.63 to 5%. Your income over and above the 75,000 will go to 5.9. So the first 75,000 is at 5% of your federal adjusted gross income, which we understand has all of your mortgage deductions, everything else in it. 5.9% then above $75,000. All of those funds, those incremental increases, goes into something called the State Achievement Fund, which is estimated in the next fiscal year to be $950 million roughly. All of that money goes into the State Achievement Fund, which can only be used for education, educational purposes.
K through 12. Right.
Yes, K through 12.
Pre-K.
Preschool through 12th grade, not higher ed. Proposition 103 that we talked about earlier that was mentioned that I ran had higher ed in it. This bill does not have higher ed in it. It's preschool through 12th. So that gives you a little understanding of what this bill does.
Okay, yes.
Barb, your question starts by taking a look at the beginning of the recession and asking about only those years. So let's recognize that during the recession, every state had to retrench. Every family just about had to retrench. And rather than just preserving what they really should have, which was that part of Amendment 23 that said you've got to spend more, the legislature found some weasel words to get around that, and they did cut. If we look at the bigger picture, if we go back to, say, the 80s, we see that after you wash out inflation, there has been 50% real dollars more going to education than there was before. And yet the outcomes have barely budged, whether it's the test scores or the other measures that we do for outcomes. So you look at that bigger picture and you see just moving the money around among districts, as this proposes to do, isn't going to restore health to a system that's bad, because you're once again equating just dollars with outcomes. And so I think it's important that you take that bigger picture. The other thing to recognize, please, is that in 2005, voters were asked to pass, and did, pass Referendum C. You might remember Referendum C was told to us as being a 5-year timeout. But what it did was it built up that base such that this year, if you go to the nonpartisan Legislative Council report, you'll see that Referendum C is bringing in over $1 billion this year, and it's projected to go above $1.4 billion. So we've already kind of addressed this back in 2005. We see that chunk of money coming in, and it's as if Right now, proponents of this measure are ignoring how important all the money is that's going in already and acting as if we're starting from $0. We're just not.
Well, now, what was Amendment C for? I'm not sure I remember.
Referendum C was supposedly a 5-year timeout in which any Tabor restriction for collections was relaxed for that time. And the money was to go to proportionally, healthcare, and transportation, and education.
So we don't know how much education got of that.
There was a report done by former state treasurer Mark Hillman that showed that the legislature's promises about where that money would go didn't track with what actually came out.
Okay.
He wrote that probably, I'm going to say, 5-6 years ago now.
Okay, the part that I remember was the transportation. I don't remember the other part.
That was Ref D.
Oh, that was D?
And that did not pass.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Transportation is not part of the general fund.
I see.
I happen to chair the Senate Transportation Committee, and we're not even funding roads and bridges, but that's a whole other story.
Okay, Chad, go ahead.
I have a question for Senator Heath. As I understand it, this new legislation actually basically gets rid of Amendment 23? Or
it repeals that part that requires us to fund.
Correct. And you might want to talk for a second about
inflation.
What happens if we don't fix that, because I know there's some pretty big issues within the state budget about this thing being on autopilot in potentially recessionary times, et cetera.
Well, if we don't fund it, we're back to the status quo and nothing changes.
And is there any if we don't fund it, is there a deficit or anything being built up? Because I know if CPI continues to grow and our state revenues go down, do we have a contingent liability in the future, or? Well,
all that Amendment 23 requires, I shouldn't say all, it would require us to fund at the growth plus inflation rate. The 1% is gone. And we would just continue down that path. We would not be funding the factors.
Okay.
So we could go right down this path again.
Okay, and if this amendment fails, then we just don't fund any of the programs. Is that correct?
We do not have the $960 or $950 million to fund it, yes.
Okay, now those who are opposed to it, do you think that, let's not pretend we're in the Denver metro area. Let's pretend we're in, I don't know, was it Hillman I read about, some little tiny school district, or where the Lobato case came from. Was that Monte Vista or Alamosa?
It was Center.
Center, yes, yes. Let's pretend we're there and they're not getting the kind of education that we're getting in Poudre R1. Let's pretend we're from there, and they probably would do well under this bill. Is that right? It would do some equalization?
There are 13 districts that Legislative Council has found will actually lose money under this new formula that include places like Cheyenne County, Clear Creek, Gilpin, Hanover, DeBeck, so small prairie, small school districts that are rural and identified by you, Barb, as ones that might not be getting a Poudre.
And Penn, that's only half of the truth statement. That's only for the base. And when you put in all the other factors that are funding, there is not a school district in this state that's losing money. They're all getting more money than what they are today, without any question of a doubt.
Okay. I mean, it just seems to me that if one of the reasons for this bill is to try to equalize the education statewide, it shouldn't be that the smallest districts are losing money. That doesn't compute unless there's a mistake.
The financial stuff that you're talking about is that right now there are some very, I think, more intelligent ways of adjusting for what school districts need. So one of the adjustments is the cost of living. With Senate Bill 213 and that common sense item gets tossed. And what happens is sometimes you count a student 2 times, once for being an English language learner, once for being an at-risk student, and more money is redistributed toward those districts. So as an example, just an example, in Jefferson County where I live and where I used to represent in the legislature, of the money we will contribute if this passes, so for every dollar we contribute to the new stuff, we get 56 cents back. So some districts are not proportionally benefited, and there are going to be relative winners and relative losers as we take an existing school finance act and start moving the money around. There will be a few other dollars. We mentioned the counting, or Mr. McWinney did. That's $5 million out of $1,000 million, $1 billion. And we can do that, I think, out of current monies. And there is nowhere in this bill that says the sort of decisions that Mr. McWinney is suggesting would be good in the examples he cited. Instead, it goes to an unelected, an appointed board of 15 people to make those decisions about what's good and innovative. And so 15 people in this state, not the locals, are going to be making those sort of decisions.
And who are those 15 people?
And I think what you're talking about is the Innovation Fund, which is $100 million of this 950.
And that gets administered by this commission, this new commission. Senator Heath, maybe you can help me out and state the name of that commission?
I'm not sure what the name of it is.
But there is a commission.
Yeah.
And Barbara, it's a formula, so the governor appoints somebody from the Colorado School Boards Association. He appoints somebody from the School Executives Association. I think there's one teacher, there's one citizen. So between the leaders in the House, the leaders in the Senate, and the governor, they select these 15 people who will distribute the funds for innovation.
Do you think the Innovation Fund is a good idea, Penn? Forget how it's doled out. Is it a good idea to have school districts have a certain amount of money over and above what they're allocated to for innovation things, and have every school district eligible to do it? Is that a good idea or not?
You know, some of the reforms that Mr. McWinney mentioned that we would all like, I would agree with you that having principals have more control, having parents have more control such that they can take a school and treat it more like a charter and not have to be restricted to the neighborhood school regulations. That money for innovation then should flow from those sort of experiments and those sort of controls that come from parental control and teacher control, quite frankly, and principal control, instead of centralizing it under the big gold dome.
Okay, and since we're talking about finances, how would this impact the average Colorado taxpayer? Do you have any idea, any figures on that, any of you? Rollie?
Yes, it's the median family income in this state is $57,000. So it would be $133 for that family, or 36 cents a day. So basically those are your numbers.
Okay, it's not overwhelming at that point. What about $100,000?
There's a calculator. I don't have the number exactly,
Okay.
but it's around.
We do.
It would be around 200. Do you have the calculator?
This takes a flat tax and turns it into a graduated scheme.
Well,
At the lower end.
two rates, right? 5 and 5.9.
Right. And
Okay.
Barbara, the importance there, and let's come back to the number you asked, because I want to answer your question. But the importance there is when you look at national studies about how a state does well compared to other states, one of the factors that was mentioned in Rich States, Poor States, now a 6-year study of how states are comparatively better than one another, and a different study on comparative state rankings by the Tax Foundation, shows that the best thing a state can do in terms of these sort of schemes is go to a flat tax. Not move away from it as we are, but to go to a flat tax. And we're seeing reform moving across the nation more toward that. North Carolina just passed one. So it's going in the wrong direction. It's starting a class warfare in Colorado that we don't now have. So the lower amounts that Senator Heath just recited is an 8% increase. Now, not all the families that have an 8% increase in their taxes are going to enjoy an 8% increase in their income. And then for the higher amounts, the $75,000 1040 that's handed in, the AGI, That's going to be a 27% increase. And when you want to talk about percent increases, let's recognize that roughly right now, in this state, we have about $4 billion being spent by the state, roughly $4 billion by locals, and some more by and federal money, because that's a significant portion now. But if you look at the state's $3.84 billion of spending, and you add $1 billion to the state, that's a 25% increase to the state. And the reason for that is that, remember, we're very decentralized. The state collects no property tax. State collects only, really, the major pieces are income tax and sales tax. And where is this hitting? It's hitting the income tax. It goes straight to the state. So it's not something where the locals are being involved with property tax.
Okay, any other comments on that?
Well, it's interesting. With 103, the argument I heard was when we talked about property tax, that falls on business, and we don't want to have it fall on business because we know what Gallagher does. So this is an income tax because it's infinitely more equitable. And the reason it's two-tier is that people earning less than $75,000 are least able to pay for additional income or additional taxes, as we know. The 27% is disingenuous as all get out because that takes from 4.63 to 5.9. The first $75,000 is only taxed at 5%, so it's nowhere near 27% if you want to do your math. That's using 4.63 to 5.9. That's what the 27%
Senator Heath is a businessman. You know that people make decisions at the margin. If I earn $1, how much more will they be taking? And the increase in your income tax is that 27%.
So at 5.9%, we still have the 28th lowest income tax rate in the country. So believe me,
yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to get to.
There is no company that I know of, and I think Chad just talked about another company that's coming to this state that's not coming here because of our high taxes. We do not have high taxes in this state. We're one of the lowest tax states in the whole country.
If we had gone to just a flat rate, we would have had, I'm told, the highest flat rate in the nation. So you have this now tiered. So I called up the Tax Foundation and I asked about where we came up. I'm sorry, I called the American Legislative Exchange Council, essentially one of the other professional groups for legislators, and was told that we will be essentially tied as the three highest states for having the lowest, and that is our base rate will be tied as with Oregon and one other state as having the highest rate for a tiered system. So if you were truly interested in helping people who pay taxes, you would have pushed that down. Instead, you raised it. Everybody's tax rates go up.
Okay, well, one of the things that I looked at was...
I'd like to ask a question real quick.
I just want to go through with my little thing, because you mentioned the Tax Foundation, and I read in the Denver Post that they said Colorado is 32nd in state and local taxes as a percent of tax income, and I know that you can make the numbers say whatever you want them to say. Go ahead.
Is this income tax increase only on personal income, or does it also affect business income?
No, it does not, to my knowledge.
What was your question? I'm sorry.
Does the income tax increase only affect personal income tax?
Yes, not corporate.
Not business.
Yes.
Personal, estate, and trusts is what I read.
Yeah,
What about business tax? You can talk about that.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of companies in Colorado and companies bringing high-paying jobs to Colorado. One of the top questions that I hear from working with a lot of these CEOs is, how's your education system and what are you doing to fix it? I don't know if you guys know this or not, but if you take all of the schools in Colorado that are on at least 50% free and reduced lunch, from 3rd grade to 12th grade, right now, 50% of those kids are dropping out of school. When we talk to the criminal justice system, and one of the top criteria they use in determining where to build a prison, when to build a prison, and how many jail cells to put in it, is they take the income of an area coupled with the high school dropout rate. The chairman of the Federal Reserve says the single most critical thing that's on his mind, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, is our broken K through 12 public ed system. So I'm all for keeping our state fiscally as competitive as possible. I'm not someone that just says raise taxes, it's great. But I can tell you that we have to fix our K through 12 public education system in Colorado and this nation, because if not, the consequences down the road are dire. And so the reason I'm supporting this legislation is it was give and take. Would I prefer to see no new increase in taxes? Absolutely. Would I prefer to see a flat tax instead of a two-step tax? Absolutely. Would certain people like to just have the revenue and keep the current system and have no reform? Yes. And I compliment Senator Heath and Senator Johnston, our governor, and others for really coming together and passing what, if you talk to most of the education reform leaders in America that really get how to fix K through 12 public ed, they will tell you that what Colorado has proposed, if it passes, will be the most advanced K through 12 public ed reform the nation has ever seen. And please do your own research on that. So, you know, I'm a Republican, and I don't like to raise taxes like everyone else, but I realize that K through 12 public ed is broken, and we have to fix it. This is absolutely critical, in my opinion.
Barbara,
Okay, and what about business taxes? I mean, if you deal with business people all the time, do they worry about their taxes particularly? I mean, is that a primary?
You know, business property taxes are high. Our residential property taxes are low. And so we have some of the lowest residential property taxes in the state. We have some of the highest commercial property taxes. What businesses want right now is they want education fixed. If you go, I bet you, if you, the Denver Post or someone should go do a survey of a lot of the leading corporations in Colorado and ask them, you know, what are some of the most important things, and then follow up with a question and say, are you willing, whether it's personally, business, et cetera, to put more money in if you know it will produce the outcomes you want? I think most people would say yes. The fear is more money is going to go in and we're not going to see the outcomes, and I understand that fear. And that's why I think you really need to look at the reforms in this bill, and you need to get, I mean, Senator Johnston's been in the classroom. His entire career has been dedicated to ed reform. You've got people like Jeb Bush and Michael Bloomberg and others leading this effort. A lot of this reform comes from a lot of the work that they've done.
There's an important thing that has been said just now that makes you think that somehow this is a very bipartisan, very broad support, and that's just not the case. You would think that if you're going to change something as fundamental as the School Finance Act, that the people pushing that should reach across the aisle and work with people so that you get a bipartisan effort. What has happened is that this measure came out in the same sort of extreme way that we've seen other legislation, and it came out without a single vote from the minority party. This was totally partisan. Now, Mr. McWhinney can register however he wishes, but he cannot ignore the House Journal and the Senate Journal that show not a shred of support for this, except from the controlling party.
Okay, now, Rollie, as part of the bill, tell us about your side.
Well, it's not like we didn't work to try to do it. I'm on the Education Committee, and we had countless conversations. The irony is, that's right, in terms of how the legislators voted. But when you look at the business community and when you look at the Republicans outside of the Golden Dome, it's a very, very, very different story. We have huge business support from this. We've been fortunate enough to raise quite a bit of money coming from the business community, coming from a lot of Republicans. I could tell you about a fundraiser that's going to be held 2 weeks in Denver. All you have to do is look at the names. They're not Democratic names on that list by far and away. So the irony is the legislature, you're right, did not, the Republicans in the legislature did not. There's something called a caucus.
I know that independent business, the NFIB, is now considering this. Do you expect them to support you? Do you know that you're going to have the support of the Colorado Association of Commerce and Industry? I know that the Metro Chamber down in Denver hasn't voted yet.
So I think the Fort Collins Chamber of Commerce came out against us the other day.
Came out against it in the chamber. So I don't think it's time to speculate after all this thing hasn't even qualified for the ballot on the night that we have this debate. I think it's premature to just suggest, I think, if I heard you right, Senator Heath, that business is lining up behind this. We know Mr. McWinney has, and that Teach for America has.
Just look at the endorsements that we have, personal endorsements that we have on the bill, and you'll see who's lined up in there.
Okay, I think maybe we're ready for final comments. And, or is there a question in the audience? Here's a couple. Okay, let's do that. Make them quick, and really, let's have questions, not statements or speeches.
Thank you, League and panelists. My name is Mal Hilgenberg, Fort Collins. I'm also education chair for the Larimer County Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. And I would like to know what is in the bill for rural schools, especially broadband, technology, buildings, and transportation.
Good question. What's in it for rural schools?
Well, there's a lot in it for rural schools. Let's talk about broadband. We've got to, as a state, deal with the telecommunications and broadband. There's money in this that can be used for that, but I think that needs to be done over and above this bill. And I'm hoping we're going to have, in fact, we had a major conversation on that very subject yesterday. We have got to get access into all the rural school districts. There's, I think if my number is right, there's $75 million for technology. The rural school districts do very, very well, and I think that's one of the major things that we need to fix in these school districts. I was in Rocky Ford, for example, the other day, and you know they're at their maximum mill levy. If you raise a mill levy, it raises about $300,000 at the most, as opposed to what you could raise here with a mill. So we've got to do some balance, and that's what this is all about. And the rural school districts are a huge beneficiary of that.
Okay, and the other question?
The amount was 1.3 million as reported in the bill. Again, that's just over 1/1000th for what they call regional education service delivery. And I hope at some point, Barb, you'll let us talk about how indirectly the employee pension fund may be funded with this money.
Okay, next question.
By the way, this constitutionally, it cannot be funded by this, so there's a short answer to that.
My name is Tom Buchanan from Loveland, and I have a common sense historical observation. You know, Mr. McWinney, you said that years ago the United States was #1 towards the top of education, and for the last few decades we've been going down. And what number are we at now?
We're in the 20s, low 20s,
okay.
mid-20s.
The common sense thing that I see is that we had all of a sudden we had a Department of Education at the national level, which made the control and dictated down what education is going to be. And I'm looking at this bill, we're going to take the responsibility of the local school districts and create another bureaucracy at the state level that's going to dictate what kind of reforms we get. And I just think maybe we ought to go back to where we were when we were up in the upper echelon, where we didn't have a national education system. We didn't have a
Well, do you have a question?
My question is, do you see that, or do we go down, or do you want to go down the same path and having bureaucracy dictate what the education is going to be?
It's a great observation, and what we know that works is getting really high quality people in those classrooms, getting them as principals of those schools, and giving them the resources and the authority to do their job. That's what a lot of what this bill does. One of the problems right now, and I want to compliment Senator Heath and Senator Johnston and others, because there was a lot of fighting within the party, and you see it in Chicago right now within the Democratic Party between the unions and the non-union supporters, where this is not rocket science. We know, take Lincoln High, for example. I mean, we know that when you can get Katie in that classroom and that she's prepared, that she can dramatically improve the proficiency and the results of her students. And Senator Heath can talk to legalities or the specifics of the bill better, but isn't a lot of what's in 191 having to do with teacher tenure? I mean, that was a, or not 191, Senate bill, what Senate bill was that? 163. But there's, the business community is pretty unanimous that we want to see reforms made. And there's a lot of things that have been done within the party, within the Democratic Party, to really change that. And I don't want anyone to think that it just happens automatically. They've made huge compromises, and that means our side too, in my opinion, the business community has to be able to be willing to make compromises, put up additional funding, et cetera.
Okay, let's have final comments.
We can't get to that, Para, especially since you had just the one comment.
Well, you brought it up, and he said it's not in the bill, and I consider it closed. So, for your final comment, tell us why we should or shouldn't vote for this bill. And about a minute and a half.
I think, if anything, I heard what I needed to hear tonight, and that is that the bill assumes that if you increase the amount of money to the state government by 25%, roughly, for the amount it puts into K through 12 education, that's going to fix the problems, that you'll get lower dropout rates and better test scores. And the fact of the matter is, you won't. None of this is guaranteed to go to the classroom. It is only a redistribution among districts, and there will be relative winners and relative losers that give in the extra money because everybody's taxes go up. They go up in the largest tax increase in Colorado history. This bill came out as a very partisan and extreme measure. We should vote it down. I'm going to ask that when you get your mail-in ballot in November, you're going to see two statewide issues. One has to do with marijuana taxes. The other is this Amendment 66 that asks for $1 billion more every year from Coloradans. I'm going to ask you to vote your mail-in ballot. Vote no.
Okay. Chad?
Sure. I'm involved in an organization called Colorado Succeeds, nonpartisan organization made up of some of the top business leaders in the state. You can go look them up online, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. And I would say there's three primary parts of this bill that we really support. The first is it really treats the principals like CEOs. And yes, we are giving them more money, we are increasing funding, but we're also holding them extremely accountable for results. And if they don't achieve those results, they're going to lose their job, just like we do in business. Second is we are going to really start analyzing the return on investment of the different reforms, and if they don't work, we're going to make changes with it. The third is it retains and rewards world-class talent, and part of, I mean, I just don't know how public education is going to get fixed if we expect to attract the best and the brightest people into the classrooms and pay them $30-some thousand a year. We've got to increase that funding, but we've also got to make sure we hold them accountable for the results and the outcomes. And I would encourage people to go to Colorado Succeeds. There's a lot of information online about it. Again, it's nonpartisan, and do your own homework.
Okay. Patrick?
You know, in 2010, I supported sending the Poudre School District mill levy override to our voters. I did that in the confidence that, you know, the money would reach the classroom, that it would support choice and innovation in the district, and that the district was capable of good stewardship of the hard-earned money that our taxpayers are entrusting us with. The record of the state government does not leave me with that confidence at all. There are too many examples of its failure to prioritize the money that we're already sending it. Examples such as Senator Lundberg's SCR 3, which would have asked the voters to reprioritize lottery money from GOCO to the State Education Fund. Many amendments. I've been told that amendments were offered on every bill that created a new program or expanded an existing program to, instead of creating those programs, move that money to the State Education Fund. Killed. So many examples of that. Other issues with the state money, there was a state auditor report back in December, $250 million, $250 million cannot be accounted for in the Colorado Energy Office. The legislature refused to investigate that further. I have that from the Denver Post right here. With that kind of carelessness with our money, I don't have faith that this is going to go where it needs to go. Other elements of the bill, local districts and parents are being disenfranchised. The burdens on teachers are being increased in non-productive ways. I've heard Senate Bill 213 referred to as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to provide real reform to our education system. Now, if that's the case, it's a real disappointment because I feel it's an opportunity missed. A 21st century approach to learning is what we need, one that embraces and empowers parents, one that supports local boards of education, not circumvents them, an approach that lets our outstanding teachers spend their time and energy doing what they do best, teaching our students. Now, if we see real reform that does that, if the state can better manage and prioritize its money and demonstrate a need, I'll be out there shouting my support. But I think that Senate Bill 213 and Amendment 66 failed dramatically to do any of those things. I will be voting no and encouraging people to do the same.
Okay, Rollie, give us the other point of view.
Well, first, again, thank you very much for having us. It's been an interesting and stimulating discussion. We have spent, and Penn said this was short-sighted and we hadn't thought about it. We spent 2 years looking at this from every aspect. And when I say we, it was a cross-section of our community. Business leaders, labor leaders, teachers, you name it, were involved in this. And there was a lot of thought put into this. We have asked a lot of our education system. We, as Chad said, we need to do better. And I think everybody agrees. We want to give our kids the best and greatest opportunity we can. So we've put a lot and said this is what we need to do if we're going to have a more effective system. We basically and frankly have not given them a penny to do it. I was very instrumental in passing the READ Act, which is designed to make sure that kids can read by the 3rd grade. Unfortunately, we were able to put no funding into it. What this does is basically allows the money to go to the kids that need it the most. It goes in all the things that we talked about. I happen to disagree very, very strongly with Mr. Pfiffner down there. Preschool, money invested in early childhood education, full-day kindergarten, making sure the kids can read by the 3rd grade is the best investment we can make for the long run. What do we do with the kids that are already beyond the 3rd grade and can't learn? This bill deals with them as well. I think this is an absolute necessity to be honest and for us to be honest with our educators and saying, we've asked a lot, we need to fund it, we need to give you the tools and resources you need. I would strongly urge people to support this amendment.
Okay, thank you very much to our panelists and to our viewing and studio audiences. This CrossCurrents program will be rebroadcast at various times during the month on Channel 14. Please consult your local listings for the exact dates and times. Copies of recent CrossCurrents programs are available for checkout at the Poudre Valley Library District, all 3 branches. The video is available at the League of Women Voters website, which is www.lwv-larimercounty.org. And there's also some literature, I think, from both sides out in the hallway. So for the audience that's here, you may avail yourselves of those pieces of information. Thanks again.
Your timing was just about right.